the way I look at mindfulness is that it's a way to guide the way you think and respond to almost every moment of your life because we're throughout each moment we're going through emotions, we have feelings, and usually we react to our environment. But when we're mindful, we can take a step back and think about things and then, make our decision. For example, if my dad calls me and says, can you clean up the room again? My first instinct is to get mad and say, oh, well, every time he thinks I'm a terrible person, or every time he thinks I'm dumb, or he doesn't think I can do a good job. But that's going to be a reaction. But I might stop for a bit and say, oh, hey, that kind of embarrasses me. Maybe I didn't do a good job before. But going back to emptiness, ultimately, that shouldn't be a reason for me to feel so angry right now or to react. Let me just think about this for a second and say, okay, maybe I didn't do a good enough job the first time. Let me go back and do it. So to me, that's an example of mindfulness in which you're stopping, you're thinking about your actions.
But mindfulness, it's a very important teaching. It teaches us about remaining continuously focused, about
Yeah.
awareness of the present moment. It involves paying attention to one's thoughts, like you rightly mentioned, one's feelings, sometimes bodily sensations, and then your
Hmm.
surrounding environment without necessarily criticizing or judging yourself. It helps
Yeah.
us as individuals to observe experiences the way they unfold, stuff around us as individuals. This fosters clarity and calmness. It's one of the key practices by Buddhists, to their own path of enlightenment. It promotes mental discipline as well. And it gives us an insight, to true nature of what reality is all about. It reduces suffering and there's emotional balance. Really, basically, that's what
Yeah.
the way I see it.
Yeah. And I like what you're saying about balance because once we become mindful, we can identify a lot of our complexes and a lot of things we do badly or that we so-called say are bad. Some things which may be hindering us and causing more suffering. That's a better word. And but the thing is that even when you're mindful of these things, there's still what I would call the middle path, which is basically saying that, okay, I'm not gonna lie, I didn't go for a walk this morning and I had 3 beers, which I shouldn't do. Now, and I know that most likely this week I will do that again. It's not good. So at this point, I have to be realistic in my mindset and say I have to gradually get better, but it's not going to happen overnight. But I have to, the main thing is I have to still give in my best effort. But if I tell myself, oh, if I go out, if I don't go for a walk tomorrow and I still have 3 beers tomorrow morning, this is terrible. Once you say that, you're creating an alarm in your mind. But what I will say is that it's gotten better than it used to be. And now I need to fight hard to make it continually get better. I think that's a better attitude because it doesn't put too much pressure on yourself
For
for
you,
failure
yeah,
or success. So I
sure.
think one of the things I would like to say with mindfulness is being aware of what I would call the middle path is, for example, we do a show and we want to do well. And I'm disappointed when we don't do well, but I have to give myself the mantra and the meditation that I'm doing this show because it makes me feel happy and actualize myself. And if it's not successful, I'm ready for that. Same thing with, we have parents. My parents are still alive today, or my dad is still alive, and hopefully he'll be alive next week. But if anything should happen, I am ready for that. So once you tell yourself you're ready for something, it allows you to still take the risk, but you know that the consequence may be that we don't succeed, but it's sort of a form of letting go, trying to be meet your goals in this world and in this lifetime, but without saying I must reach my goals. And so that's one of the things I take from when you're talking about mindfulness and being aware is that even part of the process is being aware of your thought patterns and also being aware that sometimes it's inevitable that your thought patterns and behaviors are negative and you can't fully escape them.
For
So to me,
sure,
that's also
absolutely.
part of my mindfulness. But you also say it's I really do need to stop or this needs to get better. But it I realize that, well, like anything in the world, there are things that I can't control. So
Yes.
whether it
I,
gets better or not
I
is
don't
partly
judge
beyond
myself. I don't
yeah, and
criticize
also
myself.
partly beyond
Yes.
my control. Partly,
Yes.
and you also mentioned about not judging others, yourself. I think at the same tone, we can't judge others because they're in the same foot as us. They're only human and they make mistakes. And rather than to judge, yeah, I don't want to judge now when I say, but rather than judge, I would like myself and anybody else to learn how to accept things And you can judge them in one way in saying that they're not healthy, but you don't have to judge them in saying, "Oh, it makes me a terrible person." So that's what I think. When you judge your haircut, your haircut looks good.
Okay. So another important teaching from mindfulness is the law of karma. The law of cause and effect. It somehow dovetails into the law of karma that teaches that our actions shape our future experiences. Much like you're planting seeds, and the seeds you plant today determine what you harvest in the future. This is analogous to consistent effort in kindness. It results in positive outcomes, while harmful
Yeah.
actions lead to negative consequences.
Yes.
So it's a
Yes.
way of looking at mindfulness is you have to think about what you do because it may have future consequences. So we need to take personal responsibility for our own destinies, basically. That's
Yeah.
one way to look at it. And another way to look at it is not having too much emphasis on yourself, your ego. Ego can be an illusion. There's this teaching of anatta, which means no self. It challenges the idea of being static and stable. Rather, identity or profile is like it's fluid. It's like a river. It constantly changes as we go through life, and it helps us to reduce ego-driven conflicts or ego-driven decisions. And then it promotes our ability to be open to growth and development in life, basically.
Yeah, and I like that. So you're taking the part about self-responsibility, which is good.
Yes,
And
self-responsibility.
and that's I call that the dark side of I call it the dark side of mindfulness. You know why I call it the dark side? Because I
Yeah,
like the other side where I'm like, oh, it's okay, I mess it up, it's okay. Let me be gentle to myself. But you also have to be hard on yourself too. But the
sure.
key is but you're being hard on yourself in the proper way. When I
Proper
go
way.
to the
Yeah.
gym in the morning to lift weights and sweat, that's being hard on myself, but it's love. It's not me saying, oh, you're stupid, you're evil. But I tell myself, come on, get up, you gotta go. So we don't want like and what you're saying is important. We don't want to just say, oh, forgive yourself all the time and don't judge yourself. But also, you have to put pressure on yourself because we have children, we have families. And even though we can't control their destiny 100%, it's very important for us to do as much as we can to push their destiny to the right direction. So sometimes you have to put fire on yourself. The thing is that don't burn yourself. Don't be too hard on yourself. Once you make a mistake, the mistake is made. Judging yourself, even I don't care what the mistake is, it could be the most horrible thing. You could be a pilot flying over any country in the world and bombing people. Once you've done it, you will deal with the guilt of it. But at that moment, you're not supposed to focus on what you did, yes, what you did then. You focus on what you do tomorrow. You understand? Once you commit a crime and you've done it, there's nothing you can do to take it back. And continually punishing yourself mentally is not going to help. I think this goes back if you're a Christian to repent. Repent means turn away from that activity. What
Yeah.
was it? Paul was persecuting Christians.
Yeah.
Now that he stopped, my personal view is don't think about what you did when you were doing it because now you've stopped and you're moving forward. The only time maybe that you could say continue thinking about it is so that you can remind yourself never to do it again. But we still need to find a balance. We don't want to be too hard on ourselves. What would you say? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Going from what you said, balance is the key. We need to find
Yeah.
the middle way to avoid extremes. Extremes are not really healthy. Advocating for a balanced approach in all things. This philosophy is like finding a work-life balance where we're
Hmm.
neither overworking or underworking. This actually brings satisfaction when everything
Yeah.
is balanced.
Balance.
We're not
Yeah.
just oscillating between two extremes. It
Yeah.
encourages moderation in our thoughts, our
Moderation. Yes.
lifestyle choices,
Yeah.
and then our spiritual practices become more harmonious, basically.
Yeah. And I think this is how we deal with children. Like we love our kids, but if your kid does something that could lead to danger for them later, like maybe they steal something or they play with fire, at that moment, even though you don't want to scar your child by judging them too much, you have to be a little bit fierce with them because you love them, right?
Yeah,
But with
sure,
smaller
sure.
things, like if my son comes home and says, Daddy, I stayed up all night, I didn't study, I failed my exam. I'll just tell him, I'll say, okay, well, if you continue failing your exam, when you get older, you won't get a job. And also, I'm not angry at you, but no video games for 3 weeks. But also, I still love you. That's the best way to deal with it. But if you're just like, oh, don't worry, you played with fire and you didn't do well in school, I love you. You're not helping them. So it's the same thing with ourselves. We have to be a little bit hard on ourselves, but we also have to love ourselves. And I think that balance is what I would like to take away with today. Because with mindfulness, it has so many different aspects.
Yeah,
So
sure,
we're gonna, yeah.
absolutely.
But what I'm taking from that is to be mindful of your emotions based on your self-worth and based on um, moods like feeling like you're guilty about something, or even to the other extreme, or I don't need to feel bad about what I did. While when you're mindful, you find the right level of even self-judgment, just a little bit of it, because we're human beings, we're going to judge ourselves a little bit, but we want to make sure that we moderate all these things. Because a lot of people will be like, oh, I'm not a good Buddhist, or I'm not a good mindful practitioner because I'm judging others. No, don't even judge yourself for judging others. Sometimes you just have to say, okay, this is what it is, but we have what I call the Eightfold Path: right thoughts, right actions. We want those as a model, but when we're not meeting that model, we have to find a balance of self-acceptance at the same time keeping pressure on ourselves. What are your thoughts? And then we can also talk a little bit about mindfulness of being in tune with your body, actually, your body
Yeah.
sensations and your feelings. Continue. Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, another approach to mindfulness is not being too coercive.
Yeah.
Mindfulness advocates for dealing with mental disturbances and distractions. It's like an external noise and internal defilements, but it's not good to be too coercive. Dealing with with external and internal problems in a non-violent manner, avoiding suppression, instead calmly observing and gathering your thoughts together to know the next line of action.
Yeah.
Basically,
And
stopping to reflect.
yeah, and I like what you said about not suppression, because a lot of times I'll have a negative thought about something. Like when I remember when I was young, I really acted stupid at a birthday, my auntie's birthday party, and I was saying a lot of rubbish, and people started to castigate me and to sort of alienating me from them afterwards. And but I would try not to think about it. I was like, oh, but after a while, I said, if you try not to think about it and suppress it, it's actually going to lead to more anxiety and lead to behaviors that no one can predict. It could be maybe like drinking, or one day your son is around and you shout at your son, but you're angry about that thing. So what you're saying is to let it come out. It's just like poison. Let it come to the surface and observe it and be gentle with it. You don't, once it's coming out, you don't have to start making judgments. Oh, look how I feel. Just observe it. And from what I've learned is when you do that, when you don't fight negative thoughts, the negative thoughts that you have from when you were in secondary school or when you were younger, if you don't run away from them and you just sit down and let them come and observe them a little bit, after a while, you can start thinking about them and you feel no pain. I call it kind of becoming empty. You say, oh yeah, like for example, now I remember when I was young, my dad shouted at me, but hey, I also shouted at my son, and millions of people in the world have shouted at their children before. So it's no big deal. So it's even though it's a bad thing, I don't have to think about it too much anymore. And I become less obsessed with it. And then I stop thinking about it because it's no longer an issue. You get what I'm saying? Yeah. What are your thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think one way to look at it is ability to stop and slow down. Practicing
Yeah.
mindfulness helps us to learn to pause and not react impulsively. Slow down mental processes, creating a space for a clearer comprehension so that we can make wiser decisions and we are
Yeah.
better
Yeah.
for it, really.
Yeah.
Mindfulness leads
And this
to,
is something
okay,
that's important through all fields. Sometimes our mind goes a million places, especially if you're creative like we are, and you're thinking
exactly.
about 6 or 7 different things. No, isolate each thing, clear your mind, and focus on what is the problem right now. And when you don't have emotions, you can now realize what your options are and what options you don't have. A lot of times when you're emotional, you become delusional. You say, well, I can still try to do this. But when you sit down clear-minded, you can now look at the problem and you can weigh out all the probabilities and say, okay, let's give this a try. If it doesn't work, because then you're dealing with what you can control and what not what you can't. So I think clarity is very important. So what I've learned today is that part of mindfulness is not only balance, but it's also clarity, thinking clearly, separating yourself from your emotion. When you separate yourself from your emotion, you're not saying it doesn't exist. You're just saying my emotion is not my mind.
Sure.
Now my mind is looking at my emotions, is looking at my fears, is looking at my beliefs, is looking at how my body feels. Now, as a total being, I can decide how to move forward now. So yeah,
That we should be able to identify and name our various mental states.
yeah.
If you are angry, you should be able to identify it as anger so that the force of anger over you is not so pronounced. That's
Sorry, can
another
I
important.
interrupt very quickly? So
Yes,
I
go ahead.
agree with you, because sometimes when I feel embarrassed, I say, "Oh, I'm embarrassed now." actually my embarrassment is secondary to what the real thing was, the anger. Then when I say, okay, why am I angry? Then I can deal with the embarrassment. Sorry, continue. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so basically, we need to be able to name them,
Yeah.
identify them, and reduce their influence over us. That way, we are less likely to do something, annoying or something wrong. It helps us to handle our disturbances better, you know. And then another important thing is that there are techniques for handling distractions, when we're meditating, so
Yeah.
that we can turn disturbances into like an object of meditation and handle our minds, our states of mind in a more constructive and not destructive way, basically.
Yeah.
So
That,
overall, I think mindfulness helps spiritual development, but it also helps our daily life by promoting calmness, it reduces stress, and then you can focus and you have emotional balance and resilience, basically.
yes, thank you very much. And I like what you were saying about going back to about being clear-minded and looking at everything. I look at it, people think detachment is a bad thing. It's not, detachment doesn't mean that you don't have feelings. It just means that you're able to look at everything clearly without being influenced one way or the other. And the main thing about detachment is that you're not holding on to anything. The only thing you're actually holding on to is yourself or to God. I don't know. It doesn't matter what anybody's religion is. Even if you believe you're the only person in the world and you have energy, to me, energy is God. So holding on to God and oneself to me is one and the same thing. And once you hold on to God and you hold on to yourself, you're able to go through suffering a lot better because you don't attach yourselves too much. It's just like if a child is holding on to her mother's stomach, and the more she holds on to her mother's stomach, when the mother gets rid of it, it causes more pain, or even holding. So the more you hold on to something, the more pain and aggression it causes. Whereas if you don't hold on to it, when you lose it, it's still painful, but the trauma and the rupture is not as much.
Mindfulness is a wonderful
Yeah.
teaching of Buddhism. And basically, it's from the little I've read, I've learned how to control my thoughts better. Because when your thoughts are better controlled, then the consequences of your actions are not as destructive as they ought to be naturally. So that's
Yeah.
basically what I'm
We
rounding
should have
up.
given that advice to Highland before he threw the ball at the player.
He should be doing Zen and Buddhism. The guy should be doing Zen and Buddhism.
Then, yeah.
Yeah.